Before I share this story, I want to ask you something from the heart. If my words touch you, if you feel the weight of betrayal and the struggle to rise again, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me where you are watching from, because your voice matters here. And if you know someone who has faced the pain of family lies and manipulation, share this video so they know they are not alone. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps these stories reach the people who need them most. The room fell silent when she raised the paper above her head, her voice slicing through the laughter and clinking glasses like a knife. The house, the money, and the land are mine. You have no right to anything anymore, because our mother erased you from the will. Her words echoed against the decorated walls, louder than the Christmas music playing softly in the background. I felt my chest collapse, as if someone had kicked the air out of me. My plate was still full of turkey and mashed potatoes, untouched, now tasting like ashes in my mouth. All eyes were on me, and yet no one spoke. My sister's smile, cold and triumphant, burned itself into my memory as the lights from the tree reflected off her earrings like cruel stars. I remember gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white, because if I let go, I thought I might fall to the ground. My body trembled, not from the winter cold outside, but from the realization that everything I had built, everything I had sacrificed, had been erased in a single stroke of ink. For 20 years, I had been the silent backbone of that family. I had sent money every month, skipped vacations, worked double shifts, and lived in a cramped apartment while they enjoyed the comfort of the house I helped maintain. And yet, here she was, my own sister, announcing to the world that I was nothing. The years flashed before me in a blur. It was 2001 when I left home with barely $200 in my pocket, taking the first job that came my way in a small factory outside Chicago. The machines roared day and night, and my hands bled from the sharp edges of metal parts. But I endured because I knew my mother depended on me to pay the bills and keep the land in our family's name. Month after month, I wired money back home, sometimes $500, sometimes $1,000 when overtime was generous. My sister never complained about the money arriving late, but she also never once asked how I was surviving. I can still feel the concrete walls of my one-room apartment, painted a sickly yellow, the radiator clanking during the long winters. I ate canned soup and day-old bread, while my sister posted pictures of birthday parties and new clothes for her children. "We couldn't do it without you," my mother would say on the phone, her voice carrying both gratitude and expectation. I held on to those words like a lifeline. I told myself the sacrifices would be worth it, that one day, when the house was finally safe and the debts were gone, we would all sit together and celebrate as a family without shadows between us. But shadows had been growing all along. I just refused to see them. In 2010, I came home for a rare visit. The walls of the house smelled of fresh paint, the roof had been repaired, and there was a new television in the living room. My mother hugged me tightly, but my sister barely looked at me. I thought it was because I had been gone too long, because I had missed her children's birthdays. I never imagined it was because she was already planning to take everything I had worked for. That evening, as we ate together, she spoke about investments, about the importance of securing our future. I didn't understand her words then, but I remember the way she looked at the deeds my mother kept in the cabinet, as if they were already hers. The manipulation was slow, like poison diluted in water. My mother began praising my sister more often, saying she was the one who stayed, the one who cared for her when I couldn't. I didn't argue. I couldn't. How could I when it was true? I lived far away. I only visited when I could, and my sister was the one cooking meals and running errands. I thought we were a team, each contributing in our own way. But behind the kindness, behind the endless thank yous, there was a knife being sharpened in silence. Now, sitting at that Christmas table in 2023, with my sister waving the will in her hand, I realized that the knife had finally struck. My mother's signature on that paper felt like betrayal etched in black ink. The woman who had once promised me that all my sacrifices would not be in vain had decided that my existence was worth less than the convenience of proximity. The tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. not in front of everyone who had chosen silence as my life's work was stripped away. The scent of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the room, but it only made me nauseous. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. My voice was hoarse when I finally spoke. After everything I gave, after everything I lost, this is what I mean to you? My sister smirked, folding the paper carefully as though it were a sacred document. You chose your life. We chose ours. And in that moment, I realized I was not just losing the inheritance. I was losing the family I thought I had saved. The first years were the hardest, when the weight of survival pressed against my chest every morning. I remember 2003 vividly, when the factory announced layoffs, and I was forced to pick up work as a night janitor in a downtown office building. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me as I dragged my mop across endless hallways, the smell of disinfectant burning my nostrils. I would finish at dawn, my back aching, my hands blistered, and still I would rush to a second shift at the warehouse just to make sure the monthly wire transfer reached home. $800 that month. I recall exactly, because I skipped paying my own rent and borrowed from a friend just so my mother wouldn't worry. I told myself this was love, that love was supposed to hurt. Every sacrifice, every empty refrigerator in my apartment, every winter spent under a single thin blanket, I justified by the smile I imagined on my mother's face when she paid the electricity bill or bought medicine for her aching joints. My sister rarely called me, but when she did, it was to remind me of what was needed. The roof is leaking again. The kids need school supplies. We can't keep up with the taxes. Her voice carried no warmth, no thank you, just demands dressed in the disguise of urgency, and I complied every single time because I believed that was my role. By 2008, I had aged 10 years in appearance. My hair, once thick and dark, began to thin, and the lines around my eyes carved themselves deep from sleepless nights. I had no vacations, no relationships that lasted, because who could love a man who lived half in shadows, half in debt, chained to the needs of others thousands of miles away? Yet, when I finally scraped enough to send $200 one month, my sister sent me a picture of the children in new clothes, smiling in front of the freshly painted house. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred, convincing myself it was proof that my pain was worth something. But slowly, the cracks widened. My mother started comparing me to my sister, not in cruel ways at first, but in subtle comments that pierced deeper than direct criticism. Your sister is here every day. She cooks for me when I'm tired. She never lets me go alone to the doctor. I swallowed those words, nodding, never once pointing out that the money paying for those meals, for those medical appointments, was scraped from my own flesh and bone. I wanted to be invisible, if being invisible meant they could live comfortably. My sister's manipulation grew stronger with time. She began inserting herself into every decision, speaking for my mother, answering questions before I even had the chance. I noticed it the last time I visited in 2015. We sat at the old wooden table, the one with scratches from decades of family dinners, and when I asked my mother about the land, about the documents, it was my sister who spoke. Don't worry about that. It's taken care of. The way she said it chilled me, but I forced a smile, ignoring the unease in my gut. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the outsider who questioned everything. There were moments when I felt the trap tightening, but I looked away. Like in 2018, when I sent money for what I thought was a new water pump, only to find out later it had been used for a vacation trip my sister took with her children. She laughed it off when I confronted her. We needed a break. You wouldn't understand. Don't be so dramatic. I let it slide, telling myself family was more important than pride. I told myself that forgiveness was strength, and yet, strength began to feel more like weakness. I was bending until I was nearly breaking, but they never saw it. They only saw the steady stream of money, the brother and son who never said no. And I clung to the belief that one day, when the time came, my mother would stand up for me, would acknowledge the years I had bled for them. That was the story I told myself every night, alone in my dark apartment, while the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound keeping me company. I never realized that story had already been rewritten without me. It was the spring of 2019 when the phone rang late at night. I had just returned from a 12-hour shift, my clothes soaked in sweat and oil, my body craving nothing but a shower and sleep. The number flashing on the screen made my stomach tighten. My sister never called unless it meant trouble. I answered anyway because I always did. Her voice was sharp, urgent, almost theatrical. "We need $50,000. The bank is threatening to take the land." I remember standing in the middle of my dimly lit kitchen, the tile floor cold under my bare feet, the sound of her words drilling into me. 50,000. It wasn't just impossible, it was cruel. I barely had 5,000 in savings, a lifeline I had been clinging to after nearly 2 decades of sacrifice. My heart pounded as I asked, "Why so much? What happened to the money I already sent?" Her silence on the other end was heavier than any answer. Then she sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "You don't understand. This is about family. You have to step up. Mom can't lose everything." The demand twisted itself into my mind, poisoning me with guilt. I thought about my mother's fragile hands, the way her back curved under the weight of years. I imagined her being forced out of the only home she had ever known. The idea was unbearable. But beneath that guilt was a question I couldn't silence. Why did my sister sound so calm? Why wasn't she panicking as I was? It was as if she already knew I would cave, as if my obedience was guaranteed. That week was torture. I lay awake night after night, doing calculations on scraps of paper, staring at my bank statements, considering loans I knew I could never repay. My coworkers noticed the shadows under my eyes, but I brushed off their concern with half smiles and muttered excuses. I even skipped meals to save money, convinced that somehow, in some miracle, I would find a way to meet her demand. It wasn't about the number anymore. It was about the unshakable belief that if I failed, I would be betraying my mother. But somewhere inside, a fracture began to spread. The desperation in me turned into suspicion. I started asking questions during our calls, pressing for details about the supposed debt, about the documents from the bank. My sister's answers were vague, shifting like smoke. One day it was unpaid taxes, the next it was medical bills, then back to the bank. She never provided proof, only repeated the same refrain: "We can't do this without you." And then came the breaking point. I told her I couldn't come up with that kind of money, not in months, maybe not ever. Her voice changed, cold and biting, stripped of any pretense of affection. "Then you're useless. If you can't help us, don't bother calling again." The words sliced through me, leaving me numb. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't even stand. My knees gave way and I sat on the floor, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed her ultimatum. That night, I realized I wasn't being asked anymore. I was being commanded. My sister had turned my sacrifices into her weapon, twisting my love for my mother into chains I couldn't escape. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, I felt the bitter taste of rebellion rising in my throat. But rebellion would come at a cost I wasn't yet ready to face. The first crack in her story came almost by accident. It was the summer of 2020 when I received a call from an old neighbor back home. Her voice was warm, curious, full of the kind of details people share when they think you're still part of the picture. "Your sister must be so happy," she said. "The renovations look amazing. New roof, new tiles, even a swimming pool for the kids. Must have cost a fortune." I froze with the phone pressed against my ear, my mind racing. Renovations? A pool? None of that had ever been mentioned in the desperate pleas for money. There had been no word of improvements, only of debts and looming disaster. After the call ended, I sat in silence, my pulse hammering in my temples. I replayed every conversation I'd had with my sister, every carefully crafted plea for help. 50,000 for taxes, thousands more for repairs. And yet the house was not falling apart. It was thriving. I began to dig. At first, it was small questions to my mother, disguised as casual curiosity. "How are things with the bank?" I asked one evening. She hesitated, then laughed nervously. "Oh, the bank? Don't worry. Your sister handled it. Everything is fine now. But her tone didn't match her words. It was shaky, uncertain, like someone repeating a script written by someone else. Suspicion clawed at me. I started asking for receipts, for proof, but each time my sister would grow defensive, her voice rising. "Don't you trust me? After everything I've done?" she would snap, turning my questions into accusations, my doubts into betrayal. It was the same manipulation she had perfected over the years, making me feel guilty for even daring to demand clarity. But the more she resisted, the more certain I became that something was terribly wrong. The confirmation came in the most ordinary way. One evening, desperate for answers, I searched online court records from my hometown, hoping to find some trace of the supposed debt. Hours passed as I scrolled through documents, my eyes burning from the glow of the screen. And then I found it. Property transfers. My mother's signature, dated just months earlier, transferring ownership of the house, the land, everything, to my sister. Not a bank foreclosure, not a tax lien, a voluntary transfer. My stomach dropped. My hands shook so violently I could barely steady the mouse. I read and reread the document, each line cutting deeper. My mother had signed it willingly. My sister had orchestrated everything, playing the role of savior while painting me as the absent son who could never give enough. The cries for help had been lies, carefully woven to drain me of every dollar, every ounce of strength, while behind my back the inheritance I had sacrificed my life for was being handed over to her without hesitation. I remember pushing away from the desk, stumbling to the window, gasping for air. Outside, the city lights blurred through my tears. I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted, as if the years of sacrifice, the endless hours of labor, the nights spent in loneliness, had been nothing more than a cruel game. I thought of my sister's smirk, her words echoing at the Christmas table. The house, the money, the land are mine. And now I knew she hadn't been bluffing. She had planned it all. The betrayal burned hotter than any physical pain I had ever known. Not just from her, but from my mother, the woman I had trusted above all, the one whose voice on the phone had kept me alive through the darkest nights. She had signed me away. She had erased me as if I had never existed. And yet, I wasn't done. Something inside me shifted that night. The shock transformed into something sharper, something more dangerous. For the first time, I stopped thinking of myself as the victim. For the first time, I wanted the truth to be seen, no matter how much it cost. I booked a flight home in the fall of 2021, the first in years. The air inside the plane felt suffocating, heavy with recycled breaths, but it couldn't compare to the weight pressing on my chest. I stared out the window, watching the clouds shift like ghosts, rehearsing in my mind the words I would say. I wasn't coming back as the obedient provider anymore. I was coming back to demand answers, to look them both in the eyes and force the truth into the light. When I arrived, the house looked different. The paint was brighter, the garden trimmed, the new tiles on the roof shining under the afternoon sun. It was almost unrecognizable compared to the home I had left years before, the one I had broken my body to preserve. My mother opened the door slowly, her shoulders hunched, her eyes avoiding mine. She looked smaller somehow, as if the decision to erase me from the will had stolen years from her face. My sister appeared behind her, smiling as though nothing had happened. "So, you finally decided to visit," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. That night we sat at the same wooden table, the one etched with decades of memories. But the air was poisonous. I placed a folder on the table, copies of the court documents I had found online. The sound of paper slapping against wood made my sister's smile falter for the first time. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. "I know what you did. I know everything." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for the papers but stopped midway, as if touching them would burn her. My sister leaned back, her face shifting from shock to defiance. "It was her decision," she said, nodding toward my mother. "She wanted me to have it. I was the one here. I was the one who cared." The words pierced, but they no longer broke me. I turned to my mother, waiting for her to deny it, to stand up for me, to remind me that my years of sacrifice mattered. But she said nothing. Her eyes, watery and tired, stayed fixed on the table. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I felt something inside me harden. For the first time in 2 decades, I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I didn't offer to give more. Instead, I pushed the papers closer to them and said, "You may have erased me from the will, but you won't erase the truth. Everyone will know what you did." My sister laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed against the walls. "Go ahead. Tell whoever you want. Do you think anyone will care? You abandoned this family. You left us. You don't deserve anything." Her words should have crushed me, but instead, they lit a fire. The next day, I went to see my uncle, the oldest living relative in our family, a man respected by everyone in town. I showed him the documents. I told him everything: the years of money sent, the sacrifices, the lies. His face grew dark, his jaw tight. "I always suspected," he said quietly, "but I never thought they'd go this far." And that was the unexpected turn. For the first time, someone believed me. For the first time, I wasn't alone. My uncle promised to stand by me, to bring the matter before the rest of the family, to ensure that what had been hidden in shadows would be dragged into the light. I left his house that evening with a strange mixture of anger and relief swirling in my chest. I knew the fight ahead would be brutal, that my sister would not surrender easily, but for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed: hope. It was December of 2021 when my uncle called the family together. He insisted it should be at his house, not ours, and that everyone must come. I knew what he was planning, and though my stomach churned with nerves, I agreed. That morning, as I walked through the chilly streets toward his home, I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I wasn't just going to face my sister. I was going to face the truth in front of everyone who had looked away for years. The dining room was crowded, voices filling the air with the usual mixture of gossip and laughter. But as soon as my uncle cleared his throat, the room fell quiet. He placed a stack of papers on the table, the same ones I had shown him weeks earlier. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady, his eyes fixed on my sister. She tried to laugh it off at first, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What's this about? Are we really doing this now during the holidays?" But the weight in the room didn't shift. My uncle gestured for me to speak. My hands shook as I picked up the documents, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with each word. I told them everything: the years of money I had sent, the calls late at night, the supposed debts, the $50,000 demand, and finally, the transfer of property, signed behind my back, erasing me as if I had never existed. A murmur spread through the room, relatives glancing at one another, their expressions shifting from disbelief to outrage. My cousin gasped, whispering under her breath, "She really did that?" My aunt shook her head slowly, her face twisted with disgust. For the first time, the silence that had protected my sister cracked wide open. My mother sat in a corner, her eyes fixed on her lap, unable to meet my gaze. I wanted her to speak, to defend me, to acknowledge what she had done. But she stayed silent, and her silence was as loud as a confession. My sister, cornered, lashed out. "He left. He abandoned us. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who took care of her. Why shouldn't it be mine? He doesn't deserve anything." Her voice rose higher, shriller, desperation bleeding through the anger. But this time, no one nodded in agreement. No one comforted her. Instead, I saw faces harden, jaws clench, eyes narrow. My uncle slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses tremble. "Caregiving doesn't erase his sacrifices. He gave everything for this family, and you twisted it into your gain. This is theft, and worse, it's betrayal." For the first time, I watched my sister lose control. Her face flushed, her lips quivered, and her eyes darted from one relative to another, searching for support and finding none. The power she had held for years crumbled in that room, under the weight of truth she could no longer bury. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something heavier, something like mourning. mourning the family I thought I had, mourning the bond I once believed was unbreakable. Yet there was also a strange relief, like finally exhaling after holding my breath for 20 years. They knew. They all knew now, and nothing could erase it. As the meeting ended, people avoided her eyes. They hugged me, patted my back, whispered words of regret they should have spoken years earlier. My sister left the house in silence, her head lowered, her grip tight on her handbag, as though it were the last piece of control she could cling to. That night, lying in the guest room at my uncle's house, I stared at the ceiling and realized the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, it wasn't mine alone. In the days that followed the confrontation at my uncle's house, I avoided going back home. The idea of walking through that front door, of smelling the kitchen where I had eaten as a child, of seeing the walls I had fought to preserve, felt unbearable. But eventually, I couldn't escape it. My mother called me one evening, her voice frail, almost pleading. "Come talk to me," she said. "We need to put this behind us." I went, though every step toward the house felt like walking into a storm. She was sitting in the living room when I arrived, wrapped in her old shawl, the television flickering silently in the background. For a moment, I saw the woman I had once loved without question, the one whose voice had carried me through nights of hunger and exhaustion, but the weight of betrayal darkened everything between us. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her eyes fixed on her hands. "But your sister was here. She was the one I leaned on. You were always far away." Her words were soft, almost apologetic, but they cut deeper than knives. Always far away, as if the distance erased the thousands of dollars I had sent, the nights I had gone without food, the years I had lived in solitude so she could keep her home, as if proximity mattered more than sacrifice. "Do you have any idea what I gave up?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Do you know how many nights I worked until my hands bled? How many years I lived without a family of my own because I thought I already had one?" The tears came hot and fast, but I didn't stop. "You signed me away, as if I didn't exist, as if nothing I did ever mattered." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. She didn't reach for me. She only whispered, "I thought it was the right thing to do." The room seemed to spin around me. The old photographs on the wall blurred. The familiar furniture felt like foreign objects. I realized then that the inheritance wasn't what I had truly lost. It was her. It was the bond I had trusted since childhood. The belief that no matter what, my mother would see me, value me, protect me. That illusion shattered, leaving only the sharp edges of truth. That night, I left the house without looking back. The cold air hit me like a slap, and for the first time in my life, I felt like an orphan while my mother was still alive. The streets of my hometown, once filled with memories of laughter and warmth, now felt hostile, like a stage where I had played the fool for far too long. I stayed at my uncle's for the rest of the visit, avoiding her calls, her attempts at reconciliation. People whispered that I was being harsh, that I should forgive her, that family was everything. But they hadn't seen the papers. They hadn't heard the words she chose. They hadn't felt what it was like to be erased by the very person you sacrificed your life for. Forgiveness felt impossible. And maybe it always would. When I returned to Chicago, the city felt different. The noise of the traffic, the neon signs, even the gray skies, all of it seemed sharper, more alive, as if the world had been waiting for me to finally open my eyes. For the first time in decades, I walked into my apartment and didn't immediately reach for my phone to check if there was a message from my sister or my mother asking for money. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. At first, the emptiness nearly destroyed me. I had built my life around their needs, every dollar I earned tethered to their demands, every decision shaped by guilt and duty. Without that weight, I didn't know who I was. Nights felt endless, the quiet pressing down on me, filling me with questions I had avoided for years. Who was I without them? What had I become, living only as a provider and never as a man? But slowly, something shifted. I started taking long walks after work, wandering through streets I had lived on for 20 years but never truly seen. I noticed the bakery on the corner, the one that filled the air with the smell of fresh bread every morning. I stopped one day, bought a loaf still warm from the oven, and ate it piece by piece on my way home. It felt like a small act of rebellion, like feeding myself for the first time. I began reconnecting with people I had pushed aside. Old co-workers invited me for drinks, and instead of making excuses, I went. I laughed, maybe too loudly, and realized how starved I had been for companionship. I even signed up for a woodworking class at the community center, something I had always wanted to do but never allowed myself the time or money. The feel of the wood beneath my hands, the scent of sawdust, reminded me of my father's old workshop. For the first time in years, creation replaced exhaustion. Therapy came next, reluctantly at first. I walked into the office of a woman named Dr. Mitchell, my chest tight with shame. "I don't even know why I'm here," I muttered. But she listened, really listened, in a way my family never had. Week after week, I unraveled the years of silence, the manipulation, the betrayal. She told me something I'll never forget. "You confuse sacrifice with love. They are not the same. You gave everything because you thought it would earn you love. But love is never earned. It is given freely." Those words broke me open. I cried like a child in that room, the years of swallowed pain spilling out. But when I left, I felt lighter, as if a door inside me had cracked open and sunlight was finally seeping through. It wasn't easy. The scars were deep, and the anger still lived in me like a second heartbeat. But I started to see my life not as what I had lost, but as what I could still build. I set up a savings account, not for them, but for me. I bought myself a second-hand guitar and taught my fingers to strum awkward chords late into the night. I even traveled once, a short trip to New Orleans, where I walked the streets with music pouring from every doorway, eating food rich with spices I had never tasted. For the first time in 2 decades, I was living for myself. And though the wound from my sister and my mother would never fully heal, it was no longer the only story I carried. It was in the spring of 2023 when the unexpected happened. I was sitting in a cafe near the river, sipping black coffee while reading the newspaper, when I heard someone call my name. I looked up and saw Daniel, an old friend from the factory days. We hadn't spoken in years. He looked older, heavier around the eyes, but his smile was the same. He sat across from me, and within minutes it was as if no time had passed at all. We talked for hours, about work, about the past, about everything we had endured. Eventually, he leaned closer and said, "You know, I always admired you. You gave everything for your family. But what about you? When do you get to live?" The words hit me like a jolt. They weren't accusatory. They were compassionate, honest. And for the first time, I didn't feel shame in answering. "Now," I said softly. "Now I live." That chance meeting turned into a friendship renewed. Daniel introduced me to people, invited me into circles I had never dared to enter before. Through him, I met Elena, a teacher with a gentle laugh and eyes that seemed to see right through me. She asked questions that no one had ever asked. Not about what I had given, but about what I loved. "What makes you happy?" she asked one evening as we walked through the park, the leaves crunching under our feet. I didn't know how to answer at first, but she waited, and eventually I said, "Building things with my hands, music, walking at night when the city is quiet." She smiled as though I had just given her a priceless secret. Being with her felt like rediscovering color after living in black and white. I was cautious, wounded, afraid to trust, but she never demanded anything. She simply stayed, patient, kind, showing me that love could exist without conditions, without sacrifices measured in dollars and broken bones. With her, I learned that I could laugh again, that I could imagine a future without the weight of betrayal dragging me backward. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent years believing my life was bound to the choices of my mother and sister, that my worth depended on their approval. Yet here I was, finding joy in the simplest of things: a shared meal, a long walk, the sound of Elena's voice reading aloud from her favorite book. It felt like a quiet revolution, a rewriting of my story that no will or piece of paper could erase. One evening, I received a letter from my hometown. It was from my cousin, the one who had gasped when the truth came out in front of the family. She wrote that things had changed since then, that my sister was no longer respected, that whispers of her greed had spread, isolating her. "People finally see her for who she is," the letter read. "And they see you differently too. They know what you gave. They talk about it now." I read those words slowly, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. Part of me wanted to celebrate, to feel triumphant, but another part only felt tired. Recognition came too late. The years were gone, the trust broken beyond repair. Still, there was peace in knowing that the truth had surfaced, that I wasn't crazy for having believed I was betrayed. And in that moment, with Elena's hand resting in mine as I folded the letter, I realized that the retribution I had sought wasn't what I needed anymore. What I needed was exactly what I had now: freedom, honesty, and a life that finally belonged to me. Sometimes I still dream of that Christmas table, the paper in my sister's hand, her voice ringing through the room as she declared I had nothing. I wake drenched in sweat, my chest pounding, the sting of betrayal lingering as if it had just happened. But then I look around my apartment, small but warm, filled with things I chose for myself, and I remember that I am no longer chained to their decisions. The truth is, I lost my family long before the will was read. I lost them in the years when my love was measured only by the money I could provide, when my worth was calculated in sacrifices no one remembered. The inheritance was never just about land or money. It was about recognition, about being seen for the years I gave away piece by piece. When they erased me, it wasn't the property I mourned. It was the illusion that I had ever truly belonged to them. But life has a way of teaching lessons in the harshest of ways. I learned that love given out of guilt is not love at all, that sacrifice made without boundaries becomes self-destruction. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who cut the deepest wounds. And I learned that survival means choosing yourself, even when it feels like abandonment, even when it feels like betrayal. Now, when I walk along the river in the evenings, the city lights shimmering on the water, I feel a strange peace. I think of the years I lost, but I also think of the years I still have. I think of Elena's laughter, of the sound of my guitar filling the silence of my apartment, of the smell of fresh bread in the morning. Small things, ordinary things. But they are mine. No one can take them from me. If there is one message in all of this, it is that betrayal does not define you. It wounds, it scars, it reshapes, but it does not erase. I was erased on paper, but in living, in rebuilding, in choosing myself, I became more visible than ever. My story did not end at that Christmas table. It began there. And when I look into the mirror now, I don't see the shadow of the man who lived for others. I see someone who endured, someone who finally stepped out of the silence, someone who reclaimed his own life. That, more than any inheritance, is the legacy I choose to carry forward.